Episode 2, The Unexpected Teammate. At 5:58 a.m. the next day, Caleb returned to the nondescript DWEA headquarters, pulling his black case behind him. Walking out from the corner through the thin curtain of rain, he saw Uncle Warren squatting under the roof of the low building. Warren was finishing a double cheeseburger in a cheap paper wrapper. Beside him was a second large suitcase with the association logo printed on it. "Here," Warren said with a mouthful of food. He shoved a wrinkled fast food bag at Caleb. It smelled vaguely of onions. Caleb took it without enthusiasm. Listening to the sound of Warren chomping, Caleb pretended not to notice his bad manners. He allowed his sight to focus on the enormous Hill Valley Protective Dome, shrouded in darkness under the heavy rain clouds. "Eat, kid," Warren insisted. "It's good. No one can refuse a double cheese smack burger." Caleb hoisted the bag up to his nose, screwing his face up with distaste. Uncle Warren wasn't concerned about Caleb's attitude. He finished his meal by licking his fingers with relish. "It's 6 o'clock, Caleb offered. He took out his phone and confirmed the time. "Don't worry. She'll be here." "She?" Caleb didn't expect a female alpha hunter would be part of their team, but his little sister Daisy was tough. So he shrugged and asked, "Who is she?" "Her name is Crystal." As soon as Uncle Warren finished speaking, a clear and calm female voice came from behind him. "What are you two waiting for?" The young woman had short chestnut hair and wore purple combat boots. She was wearing a tight-fitting jumpsuit that outlined her exquisite curves. Her hair was styled to accentuate her delicate and fair face. She did not have any expression on her face, and she looked adamant. "Glad you could join us," Warren said with his friendly smile. Tossing the greasy remains of his meal into an overflowing trash can, he wiped his hands on the front of his pants. "Let's go," he said, leading the way into the shabby building. The elevator went up to the 27th floor of the building, taking them to the top of the outer dome. When the elevator door opened, Caleb was shocked. He saw that the entire floor had been transformed into an open-air hangar filled with dozens of small craft. Caleb had no idea how powerful the DWEA was. Small, military-style planes were taxiing onto an elevated platform. Caleb saw that they were each numbered in silver paint. Their streamlined fuselages sprayed orange-red flames from the fuel burning. One by one, they slowly drove out of the hangar and glided into the takeoff runway. The loud roar of the engine echoed in their ears. Warren made an impatient gesture and climbed into the cabin of the waiting aircraft, followed by Crystal. Caleb brought up the rear, unconsciously staring at Crystal's hourglass figure. He looked away and swallowed hard. "What is this place?" Caleb asked. "It's where we get our ride," Warren shouted over the noise. Crystal looked at Caleb, with her eyebrows raised but said nothing. They jogged to a waiting aircraft to their right, Warren leading the way. As the three of them entered the cabin and took their seats, the airlock was sealed, with a not-so-subtle thunk. After the AI system connected to the ship to confirm that the departure route was safe, they set off with a slight tremor. The engines began to roar as the aircraft plunged headfirst into the rainstorm, flying diagonally through the thick gray clouds like a lightning bolt. The noise of the engines passed through the cabin walls and filled the space. Caleb closed his eyes and held on to the seat. He could detect a faint fragrance of roses. He opened his eyes to see that Crystal was leaning close to him. The skin of her pretty face was almost translucent. Her sword-like eyebrows furrowed slightly. "So you're Caleb." She did not express approval or disdain with her voice. Judging from her appearance, she was around the same age as Caleb. "You look familiar." The rest of her words were drowned out by the sound of thunder and the roaring engines. After a moment of contemplation, Crystal withdrew without another word. She seemed disappointed somehow. But Caleb did not know what he had done wrong. Crystal moved to an empty seat at the far end of the cabin. She closed her eyes and appeared to fall asleep. Warren pushed Caleb in the chest to get his attention. He said nothing, winking with hidden meaning instead. Caleb ignored Warren's wink and asked with a frown, "So who is she? Does she have any experience?" Uncle Warren chuckled, showing his yellow teeth before answering.
"You'll find out soon enough. She'll show you what she can do."
The older man peered at a display showing the aircraft's trajectory.
"It's time to get ready," he said. "We'll be there soon."
Warren opened his suitcase and took out his PA-2 power suit with red stripes on the bottom. He stepped into the armor, tightening the straps and gesturing to Caleb to do the same with his own. Caleb followed suit and did a thorough check on the equipment. He sat down again and looked at Crystal, who was still nodding in her seat. He asked, "Is she going to get dressed for the mission?" Warren nodded and said,
"But she has a better one."
"Better one?"
"You'll see."
The answer was soon revealed to Caleb. A computer-generated voice spoke over the loudspeaker.
10 minutes to mission arrival coordinates. Please begin final preparations."
An electronic notification tone sounded. Crystal immediately stirred and withdrew a silver briefcase from beneath her seat. The external DWEA logo on her case glowed with a faint blue light. As she pressed the button on the handle with her thumb, the briefcase opened on its own. As Caleb watched in amazement, countless nanobugs with a metallic luster were released from the case and rushed out instantly. They crawled up Crystal's right arm and soon covered her entire body, forming a highly advanced exoskeleton. It must be nanomicron armor, Caleb thought. He had only heard rumors that such a suit existed. 1 square foot of nanomicron was equal to the cost of the surgery for Daisy. Crystal donned her helmet and loaded a beefy-looking sidearm. She put it on the holster on the outside of her thigh. The computer voice announced,
"Target arrival coordinates reached. Begin landing sequence."
When the slight sense of weightlessness disappeared, the aircraft landed smoothly and slowed to a stop. The airlock disengaged. Warren, Crystal, and Caleb exited the aircraft cabin. The sparse drizzle fell on Caleb's metal power suit, producing a pattering sound inside his padded helmet. The scenery in front of Caleb was like a bad dream. Behind the somewhat deserted temporary camp was the dilapidated metropolis of the old days. Shrouded in gray radioactive dust, it was the city of Los Angeles. The magnificent downtown that once towered in the clouds was now only a broken ruin. In the breeze that occasionally gusted, gray radioactive dust rose and covered the destroyed city with a veil of shadows. Caleb's enclosed helmet's HUD display was affected by the radiation. Various shades of green flames and numbers on the screen kept jumping erratically at his visor. For a moment, it seemed to Caleb that the ghosts of the city might be trying to send him a coded message, but he knew it was just feedback and interference. When Caleb cleared his display, he looked up to see that Warren had already completed the task of connecting with the temporary camp manager. The manager wore silver and black nano armor and had a DWEA patch on his right arm. Caleb walked over to where they were standing, trying not to feel out of place.
"Lieutenant Dave Sims, mid-rank second lieutenant."
As he spoke, Lieutenant Sims reached out and shook Warren's hand. He did the same with Caleb.
"Follow me."
Sims was tall and lean. He led the group into a military tent not far away. They stepped inside, where a long table inside of the tent was projecting a holographic projection of the Los Angeles area. The image divided the entire Los Angeles area into 3 sections, A, B, and C. Each section was further divided into sections of 1 to 5. Some sections were grayed out, but others, including C5, A1, A2, and several others, were all unlocked in green. Caleb watched as Warren and Crystal explained their mission in jargon that was unfamiliar to him. From what Caleb could tell, the mission was not complex, and Sims did not waste time. As they talked, Caleb watched Crystal, who turned a steely gaze on him when she felt him staring at her. Caleb looked away, uncomfortable. Looking around at the maps, Caleb noticed that Area C contained the center of most of the city ruins. He guessed it would have the most plentiful salvage locations. Areas A and B contained several smaller satellite cities and buffer zones between them.
"Where are you guys headed today?"
Sims asked. Crystal's eyes were steady as she said, A2.
A2?
Sims asked. That's what I said. Crystal answered. Sims looked to Uncle Warren for confirmation. Warren shrugged and did not object. Because he was new, Caleb felt that he had no right to offer an opinion, so he didn't.
"All right, then."
Sims pointed at the projected map. After locking on to the mission area, he turned back to the team.
"The AMA is at the main entrance," he explained. "You guys can set off ASAP. The sooner you finish your mission, the better for me. I'm due for some leave in a few days and can't wait to get out of this hellhole."
He placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder and said sincerely,
"Have a safe journey."
"Thanks," Caleb answered. Based on the manner of Lieutenant Sims, Caleb realized that the DWEA seemed to have a close relationship with the military. The mid-level and higher employees were awarded the corresponding military rank. The second lieutenant corresponded to the beginning of the middle level. Attaining the 6th level was a basic requirement for becoming an entry-level alpha hunter. Warren walked out of the tent, and Caleb hurried to catch up with him. "What's an AMA?" he asked.
"The AMA is a heavy armored vehicle. It can carry a 6-man team, so we should be comfortable. Is your display working?"
Kind of," Caleb answered. "It had some interference earlier, but I think it's okay now."
"Good,"
Warren nodded.
"I'll send you the mission files now."
With just a glance, Caleb's power suit completed a scan of the map and displayed the detailed parameters on the helmet screen. The temporary camp was located at the southeast corner of the Los Angeles ruins. It was the furthest from Area C and the closest to Area A. Why did Crystal choose Area A2 for the mission? I guess she doesn't want to waste any time driving. Caleb subconsciously shifted his gaze to Crystal in the passenger seat. Her thin nanosuit was like a second skin, making her body look like a championship gymnast or endurance swimmer. But the black, large-caliber pistol strapped to the outside of her thigh added a clear reminder of her violent intentions. Warren sat in the driver's seat. He looked calm and composed, but his eyes were sharp and spirited. As he drove, he kept scanning his head back and forth like a radar beacon. As for Caleb, he was tense. He held his loaded rifle tightly in his hands. The power suit had already turned on its cooling device, sensing his sweat automatically. The cool breeze formed a circulation on the surface of his body, effectively lowering his body temperature.
"We're here,"
Warren announced. The armored car slowly moved into the shadow of the wreckage. Warren did not open the door immediately. Instead, he deployed the vehicle's detector beams. After a few minutes of silence, he raised his head and signaled to Crystal. She nodded in response and pushed open the door, pressing her hands against the pistol on her thigh, and got out. Her body tensed like a cheetah moving with purpose while guarding against any possible ambush. Warren's weapon was also a K-14 combat rifle like Caleb's, but the outer shell of the polymer material was covered with scars, indications of thermal and impact damage. The two rails of different lengths were filled with parts. He turned back to look at Caleb. He signaled with his eyes, and Caleb gently pushed the safety off of his rifle, ready for action. He silently stepped onto the dusty road. Warren led the way out of the vehicle before slipping behind Caleb to strafe between a broken building and their AMA. They met up with Crystal there.
"First shift is 3 hours,"
Warren said.
Set your timers.
Crystal nodded. Warren looked at Caleb and continued,
Watch carefully, and don't just shoot randomly if we end up engaged in battle.
Caleb nodded, tightening his grip. He checked the safety of his weapon for the third time. Let's go, Crystal said. The three of them walked into the darkness of the dilapidated building. Caleb and Warren turned on the searchlights of their power suits, one after another. They dispersed the thick black curtain and vaguely revealed the gray outline in the distance. The three of them did not dare to go too deep. After a brief inspection for the most valuable materials, they found nothing. Changing their target to a lesser materials search, they found nothing worth taking the risk to retrieve. Stalking through the crumbling building on high alert was draining. Caleb's entire body was drenched in sweat. After failing to find anything in the first building, the team moved to nearby buildings with the same search pattern. After exploring several other buildings, Caleb patted Warren on the shoulder and stopped him. He said with a pale face, "I need to rest." Warren immediately checked Caleb's condition. After confirming that it was only due to mental exhaustion, he heaved a heavy sigh of relief. In the early days of the Alpha Hunters, there were many strange phenomena and creatures hard to defend against. Many Alpha Hunters were killed without any way to investigate what happened. Over time, their tactics became safer, but it was still an often deadly job. It was especially dangerous for new Alpha Hunters. No matter how careful one was, it was very dangerous for recruits. They could become hyperthermic, run out of oxygen, or even just panic and run, leading to a loss of life on their very first mission. Warren pointed to a nearby building where Caleb could see the ruins of a restaurant.
We'll stay overnight there. Let's go. I'll get the AMA.
Overnight? What time was it? It turned out it was already past 11 o'clock in the evening. The thick black clouds were at least 3,000 feet thick, completely preventing the sun from penetrating to the ground level. Inside the ruined city, it was eternal night. Warren maneuvered the armored vehicle to block the entrance of the restaurant, using it as cover. Crystal and Caleb quickly cleared the area. After laying the soft debris on the empty space in the middle, it became their temporary residence. The three of them decided to take turns watching for 2 hours each. Caleb was on watch first. Although he was tired, it was the easiest shift, Warren told him. The older man and Crystal would do more dangerous shifts from 2 o'clock until 6 in the morning. Caleb, who knew his limits, had no objection to their plans. He carried his rifle and went into the AMA to start his shift. He was cooling off now and felt oddly energized. He turned on the radar and stayed vigilant. 2 hours passed quickly. After waking Warren up, Caleb, who was trying to sleep in a power suit for the first time, found he was unable to do so. After an hour of effort, he decided to return to the AMA and keep Warren company. "So, about Crystal," Caleb began. Warren grinned knowingly.
About Crystal, indeed. She's one of a kind, isn't she?
Who is she, though? How did she get such an advanced nanosuit? Warren just sat in the driver's seat, his belly against the steering wheel. He laughed and said,
She bought it for herself.
What? How? Caleb opened his mouth wide and forgot to close it. How could she afford something worth so much?
She's more of a veteran than she looks,
Warren observed.
She's been an Alpha Hunter for 6 or 7 years at least.
Caleb looked at the sleeping figure inside the restaurant through the window. He could not imagine how she could survive in such an environment.
It was your father who brought her out of the bunker. He saved her life.
My dad? Caleb's eyes widened and Warren nodded in confirmation.
After that, he retired, Warren said.
Caleb vaguely remembered that his father had mysteriously disappeared for a while 12 years ago. After that, He became a famous expert and rushed back to western Oakland when his sister Daisy was born. Warren lit a strong-smelling cigar and took a long drag, offering it to Caleb. He shook his head. For as long as Caleb could remember, Uncle Warren had been a smoker. It was oddly comforting to know that some things never change. He did not know what to say. He thought, my father was the one who rescued Crystal, and she doesn't even care that he's gone. She never even said anything. The smell of Warren's cigar brought a sensation of sleepiness. Caleb felt his eyelids grow heavy. He leaned his seat back and slowly fell asleep.